Hey there, you ready to dive in? We're talking air pollution today. You know, that global issue that's been making headlines.
Yeah, definitely a hot topic. And for good reason, it impacts, well, pretty much everything. Our health, the economy, you name it.
And we're focusing on solutions, right? Places that have actually made some progress.
Exactly. Like, think about China. They had, like, a crazy turnaround from some of the worst pollution to, well, not perfect, but way better.
Yeah, they were in the news constantly for that. So before we get to China, maybe paint us a picture of the global situation. What's the air quality like around the world right now?
Well, the 2024 World Air Quality Report gives us kind of a mixed bag. Some places have improved, but others not so much. The worst cities this year, you might be surprised, are not the usual suspects.
Really? I would guessed, like, Beijing?
Nope, not this time. This year it's mostly South Asia. Delhi, Ghaziabad, Lahore, Dhaka. These are cities where, like, air pollution impacts every single day.
Wow. So not just a problem, but like a daily reality for them. Exactly. Schools shutting down because the air is too dangerous. Imagine that. And that's happening. Or the impact on travel, tourism, even just going for a walk. It's a big deal.
Yeah, I guess it's easy to forget the everyday stuff when you're not living in it. So why are some places so much worse than others? Is it all about cars and factories?
Well, it's a mix, right? Vehicles and industry are big ones, yeah.
Yeah.
But you also have like farming practices, things like crop burning in South Asia. That's huge. And even natural things like dust storms. Those can really mess things up.
So it's different everywhere, no easy answers?
Right. Each region has its own kind of recipe for, well, bad air, I guess you could say.
Okay, but it's not just about inconvenience, right? What about the health impacts?
Yeah, that's the scary part. We're
Yeah.
talking about 7 million premature deaths every year linked to air pollution.
7 million.
Yeah. And that's not even counting the chronic illnesses. Asthma, COPD, heart problems, even cancer risk goes up. These tiny particles, they get everywhere, deep in your lungs.
That's terrifying. And expensive, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. The World Bank says air pollution costs the global economy, get this, over $8 trillion
Yeah.
every single
Yeah.
year.
Wow. All right, so we've painted kind of a bleak picture here. But there is some good news. You mentioned China turning things around. They used to be the poster child for bad air, didn't they?
They did. Just a decade ago, people were calling it the airpocalypse. Their cities, especially Beijing, were, well, infamous.
Yeah, those pictures were pretty shocking.
It was bad. But then, in 2013, things started to shift. They launched this huge plan, the Blue Sky Action Plan, with like ambitious targets for reducing pollution. And they actually started hitting them.
So what did they do? Like, what were the concrete steps they took?
Well, coal was a big one. They knew they had to tackle that.
Yeah.
So they shut down or like upgraded over 70,000 coal plants, banned new ones in cities. A huge shift.
Wow, that's a lot of coal plants.
Yeah, it's a big commitment. And then cars. They got super strict on vehicle emissions, like similar to Europe standards, and they went all in on electric vehicles.
Like a lot of electric cars.
A lot. By 2024, they had like 40% of all the electric vehicles in the entire world.
Yeah.
It was a crazy fast adoption.
So big changes, but did it actually work? Did the air actually get cleaner?
The results are pretty clear. Beijing, for example, saw their PM 2.5 levels drop by, get this, over 60%. And it wasn't just Beijing. Other cities like Shijiazhuang, a big coal city, saw huge improvements.
Okay, so goals, action, and results. But it sounds like a very top-down approach. Was it all just the government saying, do this? Or were people involved too?
Well, the government push was definitely key. But, you know, there's also a lot of public pressure, apps that let people report polluters, things like that. It created this, like, sense of accountability.
So people were watching.
Exactly. It wasn't just the government doing it all. People were part of it, too.
That's interesting, but I guess not every country works like that. Like, what about a place like India? Can they just copy and paste what China did?
That's a great question, and one we should definitely think about. China's system is very, like, centralized. Other places might need a different approach. But that's what we'll get into next, so stick with us.
Okay, so we've seen how China, really took charge and tackled their air pollution problem. But can other places just do the same thing? Like, is there a one-size-fits-all solution here?
Well, it's not as simple as just, like, copying and pasting their approach, right?
Yeah.
Every country has its own political system, its own challenges. But what's cool is China's story gives us, like, a framework, some key ideas that we can learn from, no matter where we are.
So what are those key takeaways? Like, what did they do that we can all learn from?
Well, the first one, I think, is the importance of setting clear goals. like measurable ones. They didn't just say, oh, we want cleaner air. They had specific targets, deadlines, That created like a sense of urgency and accountability.
Right, so it's not just about wanting it, it's about like having a plan.
Exactly. And then once you have those goals, you got to enforce them. That's the second big lesson. China actually followed through, shutting down factories, making sure cars met those strict standards. They even used technology like to track pollution in real time.
So they meant business.
Yeah, they were serious about it.
Oh.
And they didn't just focus on like short-term fixes. They invested in long-term solutions too, like renewable energy, electric vehicles. Remember, they had almost half of the world's EVs by 2024.
It's pretty amazing how quickly they made that shift.
It was impressive. They really committed to it.
Okay, so goals, enforcement, and investment. But we also talked about how people played a role, right? Like it wasn't just the government doing everything.
Yeah, public pressure was definitely a factor. Those apps where people could report polluters, that kind of thing, it created this like bottom-up pressure.
So people were keeping an eye on things.
Yeah, and that can be really powerful. It keeps everyone accountable.
So it was like a two-pronged approach, from the top down A&D, the bottom up. But what about countries with, different systems? Like India was mentioned earlier. They can't just do exactly what China did, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. China's system is very centralized. Other countries might need to find like different ways to achieve those same goals.
So adapt the principles to their own situation.
Exactly. Maybe strengthening environmental agencies, streamlining regulations, or even like finding ways for different regions to work together on air quality.
Right, finding solutions that fit their context.
That's the key. And of course, there's the economic side of things too. I mean, these changes can be expensive, right?
Yeah, how do you balance economic growth with environmental protection?
Well, I think China showed that it's not necessarily in either situation. They invested in renewables, green tech, and that created jobs, attracted investment. And they phased in their policies so industries had time to adjust.
So it's about making sustainability profitable.
Exactly. Finding ways to make it work for everyone.
That makes sense. But it all sounds very big picture, What about the individual? What can one person actually do to make a difference?
That's a great question, and one we should definitely talk about more. Let's shift gears a bit and explore that. What can you do to contribute to cleaner air?
So we've talked about the global picture, about what China did and what we can learn from them. But now let's bring it home. Like, what can our listeners actually do about this? Because it can feel kind of overwhelming, right? Like, my choices don't really matter when it's such a huge problem.
Yeah, I get that. It's easy to feel like that. But honestly, even small choices can add up. Think about your day-to-day life. Like, how do you get around?
Drive, mostly.
Sure, but could you maybe sometimes walk or bike? Take public transit. Even just once a week makes a difference.
Okay, so being more aware of our transportation habits. What else?
Well, think about energy use at home. Do you have like energy efficient appliances? Could you switch to renewable energy? Even planting trees helps.
So stuff we can do ourselves, but what about like bigger changes? How do we push for, real action from the people in charge?
That's where your voice comes in. Support organizations fighting for clean air policies. Tell your elected officials you care. Vote for people who prioritize the environment.
So be an active citizen, not just like hope for the best.
Exactly. Make your voice heard. When we talked about China, we mentioned those apps where people could report polluters. Imagine that, but global.
Like a worldwide pollution watch.
Yeah. People sharing data, holding companies accountable. It'd be amazing.
That'd be pretty powerful. All right, so we've got things we can do ourselves, ways to push for bigger change. But I want to go back to China for a sec. It's just so inspiring, If they can do it, what does that mean for everyone else?
It means hope isn't stupid. It's like the engine of change. They showed us that even huge EE problems, we can solve them. If we have good leadership, smart policies, use technology right, and most importantly, people who actually care.
Yeah, people working together to literally clear the air. Well said. So, listeners, wherever you are, remember, you're not alone in this. Every choice you make, every time you speak up, it matters. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep breathing deep and keep pushing for that cleaner air. We'll see you next time.